Hello, everybody, and welcome to week 9 of the Vikings 2023 season, or at least what's left of their 2023 NFL season. After Kirk went down last week, obviously things are way up in the air. I wasn't going to do a show today because I just have been all over the state and all over the place in general. And I had this intro that it's so perfect. I would love to do it, but I didn't have the time to give it the justice that I think it deserves. But then I really thought about everything going on with the Vikings this week, with Kirk missing the rest of the season, losing our franchise quarterback, and also there were some really funny things that I saw over the week that I wanted to share. So we're gonna do it. Can be hopefully a quicker one than usual. This week I am drinking the Sour D Tangerine Sour Ale. It's kind of like Sunny D, obviously, but it's a sour, and I'm a bit sour because of the conditions the Vikings now find themselves in. It's a little lighter and a little more transparent than last week's. Smells a bit more hoppy and beer-y too than last week's mimosa in a can. Let's see how it tastes. Skull feel it there, everybody. Much lighter. It's much crisper. I would compare it a lot more to almost a cider in terms of texture and flavor. The orange is a little more subtle than the fruitiness of last week's beer from Drecker. Ultimately, I think it's pretty tasty. I could see having a couple of these rather than like maybe the one last week. This is a little lighter, a little easier, a little easier sipping, I should say. I don't want to say last week's wasn't easy to drink. Just this is a little lighter on the tongue. Bent Brew Distillery Sour D Tangerine Sour Ale, gluten reduced, if that's of interest to you. And much like your host, it's tart, fruity, and bright. Thank you, Bent Brew Distillery. To talk a little bit about the much masticated topic of what this means for the Vikings, what it means to be a Vikings fan. Um, it has been a fascinating week to listen to Vikings podcasts, be on Vikings Twitter, listening to the radio, and just the whole joke about Minnesota sports fans can't have nice things. I believe I've posted that Venn diagram meme before. The Vikings season started off at 0-3, and everyone's like, it's time to tank, it's time to have a fire sale. We just trade everybody, and then the Vikings turn it around, and we looked. They beat the 49ers, which maybe they're starting to show some chinks in the armor a little bit, but they are a quality team. The Vikings beat a quality team and then beat the Packers. And beat the Packers, I don't want to say comfortably. I mean, I wasn't really comfortable until the game was over, but looked good doing it. Kirk looked good doing it without Justin Jefferson. The Vikings were at a point where the offensive line was rating really well, where it was clicking, where it was protecting Kirk. The defense was finally showing up in games. The Vikings were turning it around and maybe going to make a season out of it. And say it with me now, the Vikings make you believe just so it hurts that much more and they rip your heart out. Um, all in all, I think I'm handling this pretty well. It's just a huge bummer because it felt like the Vikings were putting together another good push for the playoffs. And it's hit me this week how strange it is to actually realize that I was confident that the Vikings would make a playoff push despite the way the season started. And that's because of the coaching, it's because of Kirk playing really good football. And now that's all gone. And it brings into question. I mean, Kirk Cousins is an unrestricted free agent at the end of the year. Now we have a lot to learn about Achilles surgeries and everything, and that hasn't come out. And Rodgers did a different kind of surgery, and that's why he thinks he can maybe be back by the end of the season. But it would be stunning if Cousins was back, and if he did the more traditional surgery. I believe the current timeline has him coming back like during training camp preseason time. So does that mean he comes back to the Vikings because other teams aren't going to be able to like get him into their system and get reps and get chemistry, whereas maybe the Vikings could? It sounds like they're going to roll with the rookie Jaron Hall this week at quarterback. If they do that, are they going to want to try to draft another quarterback this year? Does it matter where their draft position is? Who knows? There's a lot to figure out there. I want to touch on possibly. I know some older people watch this, and there's a concept that the young people have called tweeting through it, which is when you're going through a hard time, you just keep tweeting, you just keep posting things. Usually, it's a bad thing when someone's like in a spiral, or if they've been caught in a lie or something, they just keep doubling down. I want to bring up a few posts here from Nick Olson, uh, who you'll see his Twitter handle here in a second. He possibly had the funniest way of tweeting through Kirk's injury that I think I've ever seen. It started with, pretty perfect throw. Too bad life is meaningless. All 22 angles, so you can see Addison's release and route, which I find a nice salve to dull the paralyzing angst of nihilism. Kirk sees the Packers pre-snap in cover one, checks the play, and immediately knows he'll have Addison on the slot fade. Absolute dime. Just a shame about the utter futility of existence. And so on and so forth. It got to this one. The epigraph to Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian quotes a newspaper clipping about a 300,000-year-old skull showing signs of being scalped. I think about the evidence of the inevitable violence of human nature a lot. Anyway, here's Kirk drilling KJ Osborne in stride for 32 yards. And it just keeps going. For who would bear witness? For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolence of office and the spurns, the patient merit of the unworthy takes when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Perfect strike on a Y cross with a defensive tackle in his face. So if you want to see more of these, he went on for days in his spiral. And I thought it was a really Vikings fans took it like champs this week, going into despair in some of the most amusing and nihilistic ways possible. I heard a debate about with Buddhism to be human is to suffer, and to suffer is to be human, and should we embrace that or resist it, and how much should we let bump the microphone? How much should we let Kirk going down cause us despair? All in all, we're taking it well. I do believe denial is one of the stages of grief, and that's where coming into this week, I feel like Vikings fans are at. I shouldn't say that. We're all very aware that Jaron Hall is a fifth round rookie, and second round quarterbacks really don't make a splash in the NFL all that often, let alone fifth rounders. But now we've had Tom Brady and Brock Purdy, and so obviously all bets are off. Every quarterback can be a star, and it's possible. If you were a rookie quarterback coming into the Vikings offense, which has a really solid offensive line for the first time in like a decade, and Addison and eventually Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson, like it's a great situation for a quarterback to walk into and possibly succeed. But he's a fifth round quarterback for a reason. If he had all these talents and all this skill, he probably would have gone earlier in the draft, right? So there's a whole lot of us trying to talk ourselves into how the season's not over, how the Vikings can still make a push. They traded for Josh Dobbs, who has been overachieving people's expectations in Arizona so far this season. But to learn a new offense mid-season, especially one that I'm not an expert on this, but I think I've heard that Kevin O'Connell's offense is a little more complicated. The language, the play calls, everything is a little complicated. Picking all that up mid-season after being in a different offense for the first half of the season would be a lot to take on. So I guess we're all hoping Jaron Hall can do it. Jaron Hall can keep us alive, and we can make a playoff push still with this very talented, very well coached team. But we'll see. So, oh, I didn't even talk about our opponent. The Falcons are in a similar situation in terms of being in flux. I think we're both at 4-4. They're not having a great season. They just benched their starting quarterback because of all of his turnover problems. And now they're starting Taylor Heineke, which actually is a little scarier, I think. Taylor Heineke, famously preseason Viking superstar, and has some gravitas to him. He's won some games. He's got some magic. He's a lot of fun to watch, and I think he could do more damage than I think Ritter would have done against the Vikings this week. The Falcons are also without their number one wide receiver, Drake London due to, I think it was a groin injury. So kind of mirror images of the two teams facing each other this week. And I think the biggest risk is going to be that Bijan Robinson just freight trains the Vikings. Just the running back just runs it down our throat the whole game, and Heineke makes some magic happen with an otherwise kind of nondescript cast of receivers. Obviously, Kyle Pitts gets a lot of attention, hasn't done much heretofore, but it would be very Vikings for him to have his breakout game 2 years into his career against us this week with a backup quarterback throwing him the ball. It's going to be an interesting ride the rest of the way. Hopefully, I'll get that really exciting intro done this week or maybe next week. I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you all for watching. Skull feeleth there, and go Vikings.